Hello, this is Dr. Tom Edwards, Assistant Superintendent of Student Achievement. This is part one of a collective process that we will undertake together to establish a common language for our multi-tiered system of supports for behavior. Part one is going to discuss and come to shared understanding around our philosophy of behavior supports. A common language is instrumental for any implementation because with a common language, we can say more by saying less. The number one advantage of a common language is speed. Increasing speed means completing complex tasks faster. You'll naturally reduce unnecessary tasks if you don't have to fully explain a concept to get your point across. The jargon and expressions within a common language do something called chunking or compartmentalizing information. In a common language, you communicate using terms or phrases that denote more complex concepts and save precious time in the process. So we want to work smarter because we know we're always working harder. So let's start here with part one, philosophy. Each one of the modules within our building blocks toward a common language for behavior MTSS will come with what common language we're going to establish in each module. For this first part, we are going to establish common language around our definition of motivation and the huge concept of structural engineer and what it means to be a structural engineer within a behavior MTSS. First, let's do an activity that really sheds some light on student behavior. Now, this is an asynchronous training, but I'm going to ask that you please make every effort to follow protocols that you're asked to do, pause when you're asked to pause, and really give the timing that you're asked to do for certain activities, because the more diligence that you pay to those activities, the more you will get out of this training and the more that we will effectively implement behavior supports across South Kitsap. So our first activity is a writing activity. So I want you to grab your phone or whatever timer you prefer to use, and I want you to set that timer for 5 minutes. And when I say pause the video and begin, you're going to write on a piece of paper with a writing utensil, so you need both of those supplies. You're going to write with the opposite hand, and you're going to write with reverse capitalization. So I happen to be left-handed, so I will be writing with my right hand. And instead of capitalizing the first word of every sentence, I'm going to capitalize the last letter of the last word of every sentence. The prompt that you're going to write about is a free write prompt answering, why is supporting student behavior important? So the prompt is, why is supporting student behavior important? And you are going to write with the opposite hand using reverse capitalization. At this time, please pause the video and begin this activity, writing through a continuous 5 minutes. Pause now. All right, welcome back. That was undoubtedly a long 5 minutes. Now, how would you describe that experience to someone else? Jot down a few notes or discuss with someone next to you if you're working in a group. How did you feel after 90 seconds? So after that first minute and a half, did you kind of giggle? Or did you start to get frustrated? Be honest, did you stop before the 5 minute timer went off? How would you feel about writing another 5 minutes? A lot of our writing prompts we give students are 10 minutes. So imagine how that would feel going 10 minutes longer. Which do you feel like you spent more cognitive energy on? Did you have to concentrate more on the words you were writing, the ideas you wanted to put on paper, or were you spending more cognitive energy just on actually writing the words and getting the reverse capitalization correct, using the opposite hand. So as you think about all those things, what kind of perspective does this give you the next time you're working with a struggling writer? Right? Thinking about that task and thinking about those students who really, literally, if you ask them to tell you auditorily, they can give you the concept, but you say, hey, 10 minutes, I want you to free write on X, Y, or Z. What behaviors might that lead to? And we talk a lot about will versus skill, right? This student just doesn't want to do it. They refuse to do the work, etc. I would posit that while a lot of behaviors are exhibited, they always cover up a skill issue. Underlying all the will and the refusals and the no work completed is always a skill issue. At first, it's a behavior skill issue, and then fundamentally underneath that, most often, if not always, is an academic skill. Marilyn Sprick said at a training one time about 4 years ago, it's amazing struggling readers and writers stay in school at the rate that they do. And I think that that is accurate. And so when we think about student behavior and we think about will versus skill, we always have to keep in mind, what are the academic skills? What are the behavior skills that I need to help support a student through to get them to a higher level of success? This leads us into this idea of motivation. So we talk about, well, they're just not motivated, right? Those students are just not motivated to do the academic work. So we really have to focus on, what do we mean by motivation? The expectancy value theory really defines motivation. So if I have the academic ability, then I expect to be successful in that task, right? My expectancy level is going to be high. If I think that this has some benefit, like I'm going to use this in life, or I'm having, my teacher is tying this concept into why it's important for me today and onward, that I see the benefit in this activity, right? I see some value in that activity. Now, those things combined, when we think about motivation, it's just that. It's expectancy. I expect to be successful in this. I have the ability, and I value what I'm doing. And so I'm motivated to complete that task. Right? So conversely, think about if I said, I will offer you $10 million if you can translate the Lithuanian Bible into English in 15 minutes, and you're not going to have any supports to do that. Right? You are going to value $10 million, but you're going to have zero expectancy of success. I've given you a very unrealistic timeline. I've given you no resources to help you. So you're going to need zero motivation. Even though I'm dangling $10 million in front of you, you're going to have zero motivation to complete that task. So again, we want to be thinking about this perspective when we talk about academics. We want to think about this perspective when we're talking about behavior. Why would a student be motivated to change their behavior? Why would a student be motivated to complete an academic task in your classroom? Why would a student be motivated to sit in their assigned seat in the cafeteria? So we have to always be thinking about expectancy and value when we're thinking about how we motivate students for change. And fundamentally, when we talk about supporting student behavior, we're always talking about maximizing instructional minutes. Reduced redirections for problem behaviors leads to increased instructional time, more checks for understanding, more one-on-one time with students, right? Not rocket science, but the more diligent we are in supporting student behavior, the more we maximize instructional time and get more of what we want out of students. There's also a difference in opinion among some that was pointed out by Herner in 1998. We have a pretty easy answer when we say a child doesn't know how to read. What do? We teach them. A child doesn't know how to swim. We teach. Multiply, teach. Drive, we teach that adolescent how to drive, as scary as that might be. But when we ask if a child doesn't know how to behave, all of a sudden it's consequence, right? We need to teach them the right way through showing them that the wrong way is tougher. So do we teach or do we punish or consequence our way out of that behavior problem? And that's something that I think we need to struggle with and talk about and process through. Which leads to this quote: "We can't hold kids accountable for things we've never told them we expect. Behavior should be treated like academics. Students have to be taught the skills they need." So on face value, do you agree or disagree with Aaron Green? So what if we do treat behavior like academics and we do our darndest to set clear expectations and teach students how to follow those expectations, and we practice as a class, but then the student repeatedly fails to behave in that way? Then what do? What are those next steps? And then can this be an equity issue? In what ways can this be an equity issue? All right, so we're going to launch into something that might surprise some of you, but we're going to talk about drive-through alcoholic beverage stands. Now, if some of you have ever been to some select southern states, and this image here is from the great state of Louisiana, you'll know that there are some drive-through alcoholic beverage stands. In this case, we have a drive-through daiquiri stand. Now, noting that it's still illegal in the state of Louisiana to drive under the influence, and noting that you can still rack up thousands of dollars in fines, lose your driver's license, and get your car impounded, there are still drive-through daiquiri stands. And the safety measure that the state of Louisiana implements is a piece of Scotch tape over the end of your straw. Now, the expectation, obviously, from the state of Louisiana is that you're going to get your daiquiri from the drive-through stand and you're going to leave that Scotch tape on the 95-degree day until you get home, and then enjoy your cool alcoholic beverage. Now, you're chuckling maybe, because we know that that is not human nature across the board, right? Not everybody is going to then drink and drive, but you got to know that there's going to be a number who will. So if we think about this non-example in the context of behavior supports in our classrooms and on our campuses, what are some examples of like behavior drive-through daiquiri stands? Can you think of any? Is there anything that we do that we sort of shouldn't do because we're setting kids up for failure? Think about that. Here's a few examples. Do we as a school sell school pride hoodies, but then disallow students to wear hoodies indoors? Or hoods, I should say. Do we sell hats with our mascot's logo on them and then disallow hats in the school building? Does that send the wrong message? Is that the drive-through daiquiri stand? Are we setting up adults for negative interactions with students and encouraging them to buy the thing, but then not to wear it inside our buildings? Is that a conversation we should have? Are there some drive-through daiquiri stands in your classroom? Are there some things that you do with your caseload that might be drive-through daiquiri stands that are maybe not the right structures set up for behavior support. So think about that. The drive-through daiquiri stands, where do they exist? What do we do about them? So Louisiana hopes that people are just going to keep that Scotch tape on and get home. But we know that hope isn't a strategy, so we have to be more prepared and eliminate drive-through daiquiri stands. And more importantly, we need to make some changes. So here's one example. What do you see that this teacher did to change from the before picture to the after picture? What did this teacher do? Look at that process. You're probably noting now that you can't see the monitors in the before picture. So those towers are blocking the monitors. And as I'm the teacher standing here, I can't see the screens for that number of students. So those students may well be on YouTube or worse when they need to be on the school appropriate site. And then the after change is putting those towers behind the monitors. And that's a quick structural change that led to probably higher behavior compliance and also just increased emotional safety so that students are on appropriate sites. So this is one simple structural change, right? The teacher may have hoped in the before, but then, and then they made a plan, and then the after made a lot more sense for the classroom and classroom success. So similarly, in any classroom, there's a lot of different seating arrangements and desk arrangements that you could have in your classroom that all have pros and cons. There's no one right answer. I used to think that the rows and columns really set classes up for lack of academic discourse. I've been disabused of that notion. You can use rows and columns to your advantage. Sometimes it's quicker and easier to have students be able to move their desks into small group work in rows and columns. Sometimes it's not. Sometimes you might want to have the stadium configuration for fourth period, but then you need to do runway for sixth period just because of the dynamics of that class and those two different class periods. So knowing there are all kinds of structures that work, what works best, and to have a plan, not hope that it's going to work out. So do that pros and cons analysis. How does it work out? Have a plan moving forward for that structure. Because when it comes down to it, you want somebody to come into your classroom, come onto your school campus, and be in awe of the efficiency and the effectiveness of the instruction in your classroom and the safety on your campus. My dad was a carpenter. And yet I look at this house and I have no idea how that portion of the house that is jutting out toward us in that image is even staying up in air, right? I didn't learn the skills that he knew, unfortunately, but I just look at that house and I go, whoa, that is an amazingly cool house. I would love to have that house. Similarly, you want somebody, a visitor, to come into your classroom, to visit your campus and go in the cafeteria and go, whoa, that is an amazingly cool classroom. That is an amazingly cool cafeteria, campus, etc., and not know the structural engineering that went into that. So that is the concept of a structural engineer. We want to have a plan for structure and be a structural engineer so that people visit our classrooms, visit our campuses and go, whoa, that is amazing. I don't know what went into it, but that is working for kids. Now, consider what we oftentimes see, the speed limit sign on the side of the freeway. So this speed limit sign says 65. When a speed limit sign says 65, what do you normally drive? If you were in person, I would hear, I always drive 64 just to make, or 69 just to make sure that I go 4 over, not to crack 70, but 69. Or I would hear, I always go 9 over. I don't want to go double digits over, so I always go 74 miles an hour if it's 65. right? Who actually follows exactly 65? Oh, okay, there are a few of you, but we know a lot of folks don't, correct? So what changes that behavior? What makes you follow 65 or closer to? Got you. So if there's a police car and there's that authority, then you're going to slow down, tap the brakes. So the people in front of you are going to, and that's going to make you slow down. But that authority only has limited impact, limited effect, right? As soon as you're around the bend and the policeman can't see you anymore, what happens to your speed? What happens to the speed of the person in front of you? So authority works in the moment most of the time, but it doesn't last. Now consider this story. You're driving down the freeway, but instead of just being alone in your car, your Aunt Mary is with you. And your Aunt Mary just lost her son, Jeremy, in an accident on the freeway that involved high speeds. So you're driving with your Aunt Mary, who just recently lost a loved one due to a high-speed accident on the freeway. Where are you going to be with that speed limit? Then you drive Aunt Mary home, you drop her off safely, and you get back on the freeway to go where you're going. What happens to your speed then? Do you go back up to 74? So that respect for Aunt Mary, again, sort of like authority, it worked in the moment and it worked temporarily, but it didn't have a long-lasting effect and change your behavior in the long run. So how do we put those two things together, the respect and authority, to actually impact long-lasting change in behavior? That's a concept of warm demander. The warmth and non-negotiable demand for student effort, mutual respect, care, and high expectations. And that's what we're going to get into in part 2 in more detail. So now we have established part 1, our philosophy of behavior and behavior supports in South Kitsap schools. So now what? At the end of each one of these modules, we're going to have this start, stop, continue. So this time, you can end the video or you can replay portions of this video that you'd like and consider, what do you need to start doing that you weren't doing before? What do you need to stop doing that doesn't help? Or what do you need to continue doing and really kind of double down on, because that is what's great for kids in your classroom or on your campus. So now what? Thanks a lot for being engaged in part 1, and we look forward to part 2 where we get into warm demander.